I escaped a marriage where my wife blamed me for weather, traffic, and every inconvenience until I finally fought back and reclaimed my life for good. It rains on her hair appointment day. That's somehow my fault too. My wife has this incredible talent for making me responsible for everything wrong in her world. Traffic jam on the highway? Obviously, I should have suggested leaving earlier. Her favorite restaurant is closed? I should have called ahead. The grocery store ran out of her preferred brand of yogurt? Well, I should have gone shopping yesterday instead of today. This isn't just about bad days or occasional frustration. This is about a woman who has systematically turned me into her personal punching bag for every inconvenience life throws her way. And the crazy part? I actually started believing some of it was my fault. Last Tuesday morning perfectly captured our entire marriage dynamic. She woke up in a foul mood because her phone battery died overnight, even though she forgot to plug it in. Guess whose fault that was? Mine, obviously, because I should have reminded her. Then she couldn't find her car keys, which were sitting exactly where she always leaves them. But somehow, I was supposed to have moved them to a more obvious location. The coffee maker took an extra minute to brew her morning cup, and according to her, I should have started it earlier so it would be ready the exact moment she walked into the kitchen. But here's where it really gets good. She storms out of the house, slams the door, and drives off to work. 20 minutes later, my phone explodes with angry texts. Traffic is terrible on her usual route. The construction that's been going on for 3 weeks somehow caught her by surprise, and naturally this is all my fault because I didn't suggest she take the back roads. I'm sitting in my office reading these messages and something just clicks. This woman has spent years conditioning me to accept blame for things completely outside my control: weather patterns, city construction schedules, other people's business hours, the stock levels at grocery stores. She's created this twisted reality where I'm somehow responsible for managing the entire universe to ensure her day goes smoothly. The worst part wasn't even the constant blaming. It was how she'd twist every situation to make me look like the inconsiderate husband. If I tried to defend myself or point out the absurdity, suddenly I was being argumentative and unsympathetic. If I stayed quiet and took it, that proved I knew she was right and I was wrong. Either way, I lost. Her friends probably think I'm some kind of inconsiderate monster based on her stories. She'd tell them how I let her leave the house without checking if her phone was charged or how I failed to predict traffic patterns for her commute, and they'd nod sympathetically, telling her she deserves better than a husband who doesn't anticipate her every need. That Tuesday evening, she came home still fuming about her terrible day. Instead of asking how my day went or showing any interest in my life, she launched into a detailed breakdown of every single thing that went wrong and how each incident was somehow connected to my failures as a husband. The weather was too humid for her hair. The lunch place was too crowded. Her coworker was in a bad mood. Her afternoon meeting ran late. All of this, according to her, could have been prevented if I had just been more thoughtful and proactive. I found myself actually apologizing for the humidity, apologizing for not somehow knowing her lunch spot would be busy, apologizing for her coworker's mood and the length of her meeting. I was apologizing for existing in a world where I couldn't control every variable that might affect her day. That night, lying in bed next to someone who saw me as the source of all her problems, I realized something had to change. This wasn't marriage. This was me serving as a full-time scapegoat for a woman who refused to take responsibility for anything in her own life. Every minor inconvenience became my fault. Every disappointment was my failure to predict and prevent. The next morning brought another perfect example. She couldn't find her favorite lipstick and immediately started interrogating me about whether I'd moved it, as if I have any reason to touch her cosmetics. When she finally found it in her purse exactly where she'd put it, there was no apology. Instead, she complained that I should have suggested she check there first. But that Wednesday afternoon changed everything. She called me at work absolutely livid because the dry cleaner had closed early for a family emergency. According to her, this was my fault because I should have called ahead to confirm their hours. Never mind that they've had the same schedule for 5 years. Never mind that family emergencies are unpredictable. In her mind, I should have somehow anticipated this situation and warned her. That phone call was my true wake-up moment. I'm listening to this woman scream at me about something completely beyond anyone's control, and I realized I'd been living in an alternate reality where I was responsible for managing the entire world just to keep her happy, and even then it was never enough. The breaking point came at her sister's birthday dinner. We're sitting at this nice restaurant with her entire family, and everything was going smoothly until the waiter informed us they were out of the salmon she wanted to order. You'd think this was a minor inconvenience, right? Wrong. She turned to me with that look I'd grown to recognize, the one that said I was about to become responsible for something completely ridiculous. In front of her parents, her sister, her brother-in-law, and their kids, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You should have called ahead and made sure they had what I wanted." The entire table went silent. Her father actually put down his fork. Her mother looked uncomfortable. But she wasn't done. She continued her performance, explaining to everyone how I never think ahead, how I don't consider her needs, and how this salmon situation was just another example of my thoughtlessness as a husband. I sat there for about 10 seconds, watching her turn me into the villain of her dining disappointment, and something snapped. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. Crystal clear, undeniable clarity about what was happening and what I was going to do about it. I looked around the table at her family, then back at her, and said, "You're absolutely right. I should have called every restaurant in the city to confirm their entire menu before we left the house. While I was at it, I should have also checked the weather forecast for the next week, called the city to make sure there wouldn't be any traffic delays, and probably contacted the restaurant suppliers to ensure they wouldn't run out of anything you might want." Her eyes went wide. She wasn't used to me responding with anything other than apologies or silence. But I wasn't finished. "Actually, you know what? Let me call them right now and ask if they can catch a fresh salmon just for you. Maybe I can also arrange for them to control the weather so it doesn't rain on your hair. And while I'm at it, I'll see if they can adjust the traffic lights on our drive home." The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife, and everyone at that table knew it. Her sister actually covered her mouth to hide a smile. Her father nodded slightly, like he'd been waiting years for someone to call out this behavior. But she doubled down. Started talking about how I was being disrespectful and embarrassing her in front of her family, how a good husband would have anticipated this situation, how other wives don't have to deal with husbands who don't think ahead. That's when I stood up, pulled out my wallet, and placed enough cash on the table to cover our meals. I looked at her family and said, "I apologize for the scene, but I'm not going to sit here and be blamed for restaurant inventory management." Then I looked directly at her and said, "You can catch a ride home with your sister. I'm sure she'll make sure to call ahead and confirm the gas stations have fuel before you leave." I walked out of that restaurant feeling something I hadn't felt in years: self-respect. The drive home was the most peaceful 20 minutes I'd had in months. No one blaming me for red lights, no commentary about my driving, no complaints about the radio station. She didn't come home until nearly midnight, and when she did, she was furious. Not embarrassed about her behavior, not apologetic for the scene she caused, but angry that I had humiliated her by walking out. In her mind, I was supposed to sit there and take it like I always did. She launched into this speech about how marriages require compromise and understanding, how I needed to be more supportive, how I embarrassed her in front of her family. The irony was completely lost on her. She could humiliate me publicly, but me refusing to accept it was the real problem. I let her finish her rant. Then I asked her a simple question. "When was the last time you took responsibility for anything that went wrong in your day?" She stared at me like I'd asked her to solve quantum physics. The question genuinely confused her because she'd never considered the possibility that some of life's inconveniences might not be my fault. "That's different," she finally said. "You're my husband. You're supposed to look out for me." "Looking out for you doesn't mean being blamed for things beyond anyone's control," I replied. "The restaurant running out of salmon isn't something I can prevent or predict." But she wasn't hearing it. In her world, being married to me meant I was supposed to somehow manage the entire universe to ensure her comfort. Weather, traffic, other people's schedules, business inventory levels. Everything was supposed to be under my control. That night, I started keeping a mental list of every ridiculous thing she blamed me for. Not because I enjoy cataloging complaints, but because I needed to see the pattern clearly. I needed evidence of just how unreasonable this had become. The very next day provided perfect examples. She blamed me for the grocery store being crowded because I didn't suggest we go at a different time. She blamed me for her favorite parking spot being taken because I didn't drive fast enough to get there first. She blamed me for the mailman being late because I should have known he was running behind schedule. Each incident by itself might seem petty, but together they painted a picture of someone who had completely abdicated responsibility for her own life experiences. Everything that didn't go perfectly was my fault, and everything that went well was just expected. Her sister called me the next evening. She wanted to apologize for not speaking up at dinner and to tell me she thought I handled the situation perfectly. Apparently, the family had been talking about her behavior for years, but didn't know how to address it without causing drama. She's always been like this, her sister explained. Even as kids, nothing was ever her fault, but it's gotten worse since she got married. It's like she expects you to be psychic. That conversation confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't about me being a bad husband. This was about her complete inability to handle life's normal frustrations without finding someone else to blame. Continued in part 2 if needed. But due to length, I've completed the full cleaned version up to the end in one response. The rest follows the same standard and is included below. After that dinner incident, I decided to start paying closer attention to exactly how often and for what reasons I was being blamed. What I discovered was both fascinating and disturbing. This woman had turned fault-finding into an art form. I started keeping notes on my phone, not to build some legal case, but because I needed to see if I was going crazy or if this situation was as ridiculous as it seemed. The results were eye-opening. Monday, blamed for the coffee shop running out of her favorite pastry. Apparently, I should have called ahead or suggested we go earlier. Tuesday, blamed for rain ruining her outdoor lunch plans. Yes, I was supposed to have checked the weather forecast more carefully and warned her. Wednesday, blamed for her dentist appointment running late. I should have known to tell her to call and confirm they were on schedule. Thursday, blamed for the pharmacy being busy when she went to pick up her prescription. I should have suggested she go at a different time. Friday, blamed for her hair appointment not turning out exactly like the picture she showed them. Somehow this was my fault for not going with her to make sure they understood what she wanted. And this was just 1 week. One completely normal week where life happened the way life always happens, with minor inconveniences and small disappointments that most adults handle without assigning blame to their spouse. But the pattern was becoming undeniable. She had essentially made me responsible for predicting and preventing every single thing that might not go perfectly in her day. I was supposed to be some kind of fortune teller, traffic analyst, weather forecaster, business scheduler, and mind reader all rolled into one. I decided to test something. The following Monday, I actually did check the weather, called her lunch place to confirm they had outdoor seating available, and even looked up traffic patterns for her route to work. I thought maybe if I anticipated everything, we'd have one peaceful day. Wrong again. When everything went smoothly, there was no acknowledgement or appreciation. But when the restaurant she wanted to try for dinner was closed for a private event, suddenly I was back to being the worst husband in the world for not calling ahead. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about me being more thoughtful or proactive. This was about her needing someone to blame when life wasn't perfect. Even if I managed to anticipate 99 things correctly, that one unexpected situation would become evidence of my failure as a husband. I started talking to my brother about what was happening. He listened to a few examples and just shook his head. Man, she's got you trained to think you're responsible for things nobody can control. That's not normal. My best friend had an even stronger reaction. Are you serious? She blames you for the weather, for traffic, for other people's schedules? That's not marriage. That's psychological abuse disguised as high expectations. Hearing other people's reactions helped me realize how far from normal my situation had become. I'd been living in this bubble where being blamed for random events seemed almost reasonable because it happened so consistently. But the real wake-up call came when I talked to my father. He's been married to my mother for 35 years. I asked him if Mom ever blamed him for things completely outside his control. He looked at me like I'd asked if she blamed him for gravity. Son, your mother and I have disagreements about real things, money decisions, parenting choices, where to spend holidays. We don't argue about weather patterns or restaurant inventory. That's not how healthy relationships work. Then he asked me a question that stopped me cold. When was the last time she took responsibility for something going wrong in her own life? I sat there trying to think of a single example, and I couldn't come up with one. Not one instance where she admitted that maybe, just maybe, some inconvenience or disappointment wasn't someone else's fault. That weekend, I decided to conduct a little experiment. When she started complaining about the grocery store being out of her favorite ice cream, instead of apologizing or offering to go to another store, I simply said, "That's disappointing." She stared at me, waiting for me to somehow fix the situation or accept blame for not preventing it. When I didn't, she escalated. "Well, aren't you going to do something about it?" "Like what?" I asked. "Call the ice cream company and demand they deliver some personally?" She didn't find my sarcasm amusing, but I was done pretending that normal life inconveniences were emergencies that required my intervention or apology. The next day brought another test. Her gym class was canceled because the instructor was sick. Instead of launching into my usual apology routine, I said, "That's too bad. Maybe you can do something else today." Again, she seemed confused by my lack of self-blame. "You could have called to check if the class was still happening." "I could have," I agreed. "But checking on your gym schedule isn't actually my responsibility." The look on her face was priceless, like I'd just announced I was from another planet. The idea that I might not be responsible for confirming every aspect of her daily activities was genuinely shocking to her. I started recognizing the pattern in our conversations. She would present some minor problem or inconvenience, then wait for me to either fix it immediately or accept blame for not preventing it. When I didn't do either, she'd get frustrated and escalate until I eventually gave in just to end the conflict. But I was done with that cycle, done apologizing for things beyond my control, done accepting responsibility for her emotional reactions to normal life situations, done being her personal scapegoat for everything that didn't go exactly according to her unspoken expectations. The interesting thing was, once I stopped playing along with the blame game, she had to confront the reality that most of her daily frustrations were just normal parts of life that everyone deals with. And she didn't handle that realization well. Instead of adjusting her expectations or taking responsibility for her own reactions, she doubled down. If I wasn't going to voluntarily accept blame, she'd just have to work harder to assign it to me. The moment I knew this marriage was over came on a perfectly ordinary Thursday morning. She was getting ready for work when she discovered her favorite blouse had a small stain on it. Instead of just choosing something else to wear, she marched into the kitchen where I was having coffee and announced that this was my fault. My fault? Because I should have noticed the stain when I put the laundry away and either treated it or let her know about it. Never mind that she was the one who wore the blouse. Never mind that she was the one who put it in the hamper. According to her logic, once clothing entered our shared living space, monitoring its condition became my responsibility. I put down my coffee cup and really looked at her. Here was a grown woman standing in our kitchen, seriously arguing that I should be inspecting her clothing for stains and managing her wardrobe maintenance. The absurdity was breathtaking. "Let me get this straight," I said calmly. "You want me to examine every piece of clothing before I put it away, looking for stains that you might not have noticed when you took it off?" "A good husband would pay attention to these things," she replied, like this was perfectly reasonable. That's when I decided enough was enough. I pulled out my phone and started reading from my notes. "Monday, you blamed me for the coffee shop being out of pastries. Tuesday, you blamed me for rain. Wednesday, you blamed me for your dentist running late. Thursday, you blamed me for the pharmacy being busy." Should I continue? She crossed her arms defensively. "Those are all legitimate complaints. You don't think about how your actions affect me." "My actions?" I stood up, facing her directly. "What action of mine caused it to rain? What did I do to make the pharmacy busy? Please explain how I'm responsible for weather patterns and other people's schedules." She started getting that frustrated look she gets when her logic is challenged. "You're being ridiculous. I'm talking about being considerate and thinking ahead." "No," I said firmly. "You're talking about making me responsible for things no human being can control, and I'm done with it." I walked over to the counter, grabbed a piece of paper, and started writing. "Let's make a list of everything you've blamed me for this month. Weather events, other people's business hours, traffic patterns, restaurant inventory, appointment scheduling that isn't mine, and now clothing inspection. Do you see how insane this list is?" She looked at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. "I don't think it's unreasonable to expect my husband to be more aware and helpful." "Helpful is one thing," I replied. "Being blamed for things beyond anyone's control is something else entirely. And here's what's really crazy. When was the last time you took responsibility for anything? When did you last say I should have checked, or I forgot, or that's just bad luck, instead of finding a way to make it my fault?" The silence that followed was deafening. She stood there, mouth slightly open, because she couldn't think of a single example. "This conversation is ridiculous," she finally said. "I shouldn't have to defend wanting a considerate husband, and I shouldn't have to defend myself against being blamed for the weather," I shot back. "But here we are." She tried a different approach. "Fine. Maybe I sometimes get frustrated about small things, but that's what marriage is about. Supporting each other when things go wrong." "Supporting each other?" "Yes. Being a scapegoat for every minor inconvenience in your life?" "No." I looked directly at her. Do you honestly think it's reasonable to blame your spouse for rain, for traffic, for other people's schedules? Instead of answering, she deflected. You're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. Can't you just try to be more thoughtful? That's when I realized she genuinely didn't understand what was wrong with her behavior. In her mind, being married to me meant I was supposed to anticipate and prevent every possible source of frustration in her life. The concept that some things were simply outside anyone's control was foreign to her. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and calm. From now on, I will not apologize for things I didn't do and cannot control. I will not accept blame for weather, traffic, other people's schedules, or business inventory. I will not spend my energy trying to predict and prevent every possible inconvenience in your day. Her eyes widened. She wasn't used to me setting boundaries this clearly. And if you can't handle a marriage where your husband isn't responsible for managing the entire universe to ensure your comfort, then maybe we need to reconsider whether this marriage is working. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. She looked shocked, like she couldn't believe I was actually standing up to this pattern of behavior that had defined our relationship for years. You're being dramatic, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? You literally blamed me for the weather yesterday. If expecting my wife to take responsibility for her own emotional reactions to normal life situations is dramatic, then I guess I'm dramatic. She tried one more angle. Other wives don't have to deal with husbands who won't even try to make their lives easier. Other husbands don't get blamed for things completely outside their control, I replied. And other wives don't expect their husbands to be psychic. The conversation ended with her storming off to work, still convinced that I was being unreasonable. But something fundamental had shifted. I had drawn a line, clearly and firmly, and made it obvious that crossing it would have consequences. For the first time in years, I felt like I had some control over my own life. No more apologizing for rain. No more accepting blame for other people's schedules. No more being responsible for every minor disappointment in her day. The ball was now in her court. She could either learn to handle life's normal frustrations like an adult, or she could find herself married to someone else who might be willing to be blamed for things beyond human control. But that someone wasn't going to be me anymore. She lasted exactly 3 days before reverting to her old patterns. 3 whole days of pretending she could handle minor inconveniences without assigning blame to me. I almost thought we might actually work through this. Then Friday morning happened. Her car wouldn't start, and within seconds she was back to her usual routine. Apparently this was my fault because I should have reminded her to get it serviced last month. Never mind that she drives the car every day. Never mind that maintenance reminders come in the mail addressed to her. In her world, vehicle maintenance was now added to my list of responsibilities. I looked at her standing in the driveway, hands on hips, waiting for me to apologize for her car troubles. The old me would have immediately offered solutions, taken blame, and spent the morning dealing with her automotive crisis. The new me had a different response. That's frustrating, I said, and walked back into the house. She followed me, incredulous. That's it? That's all you have to say? What would you like me to say? That I'm sorry your car broke down? That I should have magically known it needed service? The look on her face told me everything. She genuinely expected me to take responsibility for her vehicle maintenance and apologize for not being psychic about mechanical problems. A caring husband would have noticed signs that the car was having issues, she said, as if this was obviously true. A responsible adult would handle their own car maintenance, I replied. That weekend, she tested the boundaries again. We went to the mall, and the store she wanted to visit was closed for inventory. Instead of accepting this minor disappointment, she immediately turned to me with that familiar expression. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You should have called ahead. I stopped walking and faced her directly. No. No what? No, I will not apologize for a store's inventory schedule. No, I will not accept blame for not calling ahead to check every business before we leave the house. And no, I will not continue pretending that these ridiculous expectations are normal. She tried to argue, but I was done. I turned around and walked back to the car, leaving her standing there. She could follow or figure out her own way home, but I wasn't going to stand in a mall being blamed for retail scheduling decisions. The drive home was silent, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes before major life changes, Both of us knew something fundamental had broken in our relationship, and neither one of us was willing to be the first to say it out loud. That night, I made a decision. I pulled out my laptop and started researching divorce attorneys. Not because I wanted my marriage to end, but because I needed to know what my options were if it did. The next week brought more tests, a 30-minute wait at a restaurant, a sold-out movie showing, a rescheduled dentist appointment. Each became another opportunity for her to try to pull me back into the blame game, but I was done playing. Every time she tried to make me responsible for circumstances beyond anyone's control, I simply refused to engage. I wouldn't argue, wouldn't defend myself, and definitely wouldn't apologize. I would just state the obvious: these things happen, and they're not anyone's fault. This drove her absolutely crazy. She escalated, more dramatic with each failed attempt. When that didn't work, she tried guilt. When guilt failed, she tried anger. When anger accomplished nothing, she tried tears. None of it worked, because I had finally understood something crucial. Her need to blame me for everything wasn't about the specific incidents. It was about her complete inability to cope with life's normal frustrations without having someone else to hold responsible. 2 weeks after our confrontation, she played her final card. She suggested marriage counseling, framing it as a way for me to learn how to be more considerate and anticipatory of her needs. I agreed to go, but not for the reasons she expected. I wanted a neutral third party to hear exactly what she considered reasonable expectations for a husband. The first session was enlightening. When the counselor asked for examples of our communication issues, she explained how I failed to anticipate her needs and take responsibility for things that affected her day. "Can you give me a specific example?" the counselor asked. She launched into the salmon story, but told it as if I had been thoughtless for not calling ahead. The counselor listened carefully, then asked a simple question. "Do you typically call restaurants before visiting to confirm menu availability?" The question clearly confused her. "Well, no, but..." "So this would be something you expect your husband to do, but wouldn't do yourself?" That session ended with homework. We were both supposed to think about reasonable expectations in marriage and come back with examples of what we considered fair and unfair requests between spouses. I never got to find out what her answers, because 3 days later I came home to find her packing. She had decided that I was the problem, that I had become selfish and unsupportive, and that she deserved a husband who would actually care about her needs. The irony was perfect. Even our separation was somehow my fault. Watching her pack was oddly liberating. Here was a woman who had spent years making me responsible for everything wrong in her world, and now she was leaving because I refused to be blamed for the weather anymore. The situation would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. She kept muttering about how I had changed, how I used to be more caring and considerate. What she really meant was that I used to accept blame for things beyond my control, and now I didn't. In her mind, that made me the villain. "I hope you're happy," she said, struggling with her overstuffed suitcase. "You've gotten exactly what you wanted." I almost laughed. What I had wanted was a wife who could handle minor disappointments without turning them into evidence of my failures as a husband. What I was getting was freedom from being blamed for meteorology and traffic patterns. "Actually, I am happy," I told her honestly. "For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe without worrying about what I'll be blamed for next." That stopped her packing. She turned around with an incredulous expression, like she couldn't believe I wasn't begging her to stay. "So that's it? You're just going to let me leave?" "I'm not making you leave," I said calmly. "But I'm also not going to apologize for refusing to be blamed for rain, traffic, and restaurant inventory levels. If that's a deal breaker for you, then maybe we want different things from marriage." She stood there for a moment, clearly struggling with the reality that her ultimatum wasn't working. She had expected me to fold, to go back to the old dynamic where her emotional comfort was more important than my self-respect. When I didn't beg or bargain, she tried one final manipulation. "Fine, but don't come crying to me when you realize what you've lost." I couldn't help myself. What have I lost? The privilege of being blamed for weather patterns, the joy of apologizing for other people's schedules, the honor of being responsible for every minor inconvenience in your day? She left that afternoon without another word. No dramatic goodbye. No final attempt at reconciliation. Just packed her things and drove away, probably blaming me for the traffic she encountered on the way to her sister's house. The silence in the house was incredible. For the first time in years, I could exist in my own space without monitoring every potential source of frustration for someone else. No weather reports to check. No business hours to confirm. No inventory levels to predict. I made myself dinner without worrying whether the grocery store had everything she wanted. I watched a movie without checking if the streaming service was working properly beforehand. I went to bed without reviewing tomorrow's schedule to anticipate and prevent every possible inconvenience. It was peaceful in a way I had forgotten was possible. The divorce process was surprisingly straightforward. She tried to blame me for that too, claiming I was rushing things and not fighting for our marriage. But fighting for our marriage would have meant going back to being her personal lightning rod for life's normal frustrations, and I was done with that role. Her family reached out during the proceedings. Her sister apologized again for not speaking up sooner. Her father actually thanked me for standing up to behavior he'd been watching with concern for years. She needs to learn that the world doesn't revolve around her convenience, he said. Maybe this will teach her that lesson. 6 months later, I ran into her at the grocery store. She looked exactly the same, but there was something different, almost deflated. "How are you doing?" she asked. And for a moment, I thought she might have gained some perspective. "I'm doing well," I told her honestly. "Really well." She nodded, then said something that perfectly captured why our marriage had been doomed from the start. "I hope you've learned to be more considerate in your next relationship." Even 6 months after our divorce, standing in the cereal aisle, she still thought the problem had been my lack of consideration, rather than her inability to handle normal life without assigning blame. I smiled and walked away. Some people never learn. My friends and family were incredibly supportive throughout the process. They had watched me accept blame for increasingly ridiculous things over the years, and they were relieved to see me finally stand up for myself. My brother summed it up perfectly. "You didn't lose a wife. You lost a full-time job you never applied for, managing someone else's emotional reactions to weather reports. These days, when it rains, I don't apologize to anyone. When traffic is heavy, I accept it as a normal part of life. When restaurants run out of menu items, I order something else without conducting a post-mortem of who should have anticipated the shortage. I'm dating someone new now, and the difference is remarkable. When her dentist runs late, she reads a magazine. When a store is closed unexpectedly, she suggests we try somewhere else. When it rains on her plans, she either adjusts or accepts the disappointment like a rational adult. It turns out that's how normal people handle minor inconveniences. They don't assign blame, don't create drama, and definitely don't hold their partners responsible for things beyond human control. Looking back, I realized the best decision I ever made was refusing to apologize for the weather. It saved my sanity and taught me something valuable about self-respect. Some battles are worth fighting, even if the only victory is your own peace of mind. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, thank you. Feel free to subscribe to our channel. It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos I'm sure you'll enjoy. Click on them, and I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.